November 16th, 1951, dawned with the ethereal mist of morning gradually dissipating from the historic Portsmouth Harbor. On this particular day, Captain Dennis Campbell ascended the gangway of HMS Illustrious, a seemingly ordinary ascent for a naval officer. Clasped within his briefcase was a single sheet of paper, bearing a diagram of startling simplicity. A mere sketch depicting a flight deck angled at a modest 10 degrees towards the port side. At first glance, this drawing held no discernible revolutionary quality. It appeared almost childlike in its execution. Yet, unbeknownst to him at that precise moment, this unassuming diagram would, in less than a year and a half, dramatically transform naval aviation, ultimately preserving more aviators' lives than any sophisticated weapon system ever conceived. The sheer impact of this humble design was destined to far outweigh the destructive power of any armaments. However, Captain Campbell was acutely aware of a grim reality that instilled a profound sense of dread. In the preceding 12 months alone, the Royal Navy had endured the devastating loss of 43 aircraft due to landing mishaps. This staggering toll represented 43 valuable machines utterly destroyed, 17 skilled pilots tragically killed, and dozens more left with life-altering injuries. Every single one of these catastrophic incidents had transpired during the excruciating final 30 seconds of flight. This critical, desperate window involved a 30-ton jet aircraft hurtling at 140 miles per hour, attempting the perilous maneuver of catching an arresting wire on a deck that was perpetually pitching and rolling with the ocean swells. Compounding this immense challenge was the ever-present threat of a steel barricade, looming just 60 feet ahead, an unforgiving barrier poised to shred any aircraft that failed to engage the wires. It was a perilous dance between precision and disaster, a dance that too often ended in tragedy. The situation across the Atlantic was even more dire, with the American forces confronting a significantly higher rate of such calamities. Throughout 1951, U.S. Navy carrier aviation recorded an alarming 776 Class A mishaps, accidents that invariably resulted in either fatalities or the complete destruction of aircraft, averaging more than 2 such incidents per day. This already grim peacetime statistic was tragically exacerbated by the ongoing Korean War, which amplified the sheer carnage. The USS Boxer, for instance, reported a shocking 7 barrier crashes during a single deployment. Similarly, the USS Princeton lost 9 aircraft within a mere 4 weeks. On the traditional straight-deck carriers, missing the arresting wires presented a stark and terrifying binary outcome. Either an aircraft would slam into the barricade at full throttle, or it would plow headlong into the aircraft, parked forward on the deck, igniting a catastrophic fireball capable of claiming the key. Lives of a dozen men in mere seconds. The jet age had undeniably arrived, heralding new eras of speed and power, but the existing infrastructure of carrier aviation was proving woefully incapable of keeping pace. The F-9F Panther, a symbol of this new era, landed a full 40 knots faster than its propeller-driven predecessor, the Hellcat. Moreover, the new jet engines required an agonizing 7 seconds to spool up from idle, an eternity when a pilot was sinking towards the unforgiving ocean at a rate of 20 feet per second. Landing signal officers, positioned on the carrier's port quarter, would frantically wave their paddles in an attempt to guide pilots. However, by the time a pilot could even perceive that he was approaching too low, too fast, or too high, the immutable laws of physics had already predetermined his grim fate. Every admiral, every engineer, and every test pilot was acutely aware of the undeniable truth. Carrier aviation had reached its critical breaking point. Jets represented the undeniable future of naval power, but that future held little meaning when the present reality was relentlessly claiming the lives of their personnel. What Captain Campbell, and indeed no one else present in that Portsmouth meeting room, could possibly foresee was that his audacious, seemingly insane idea would face immediate rejection, ridicule, and be dismissed as utterly impossible by the very experts whose professional mandate was to resolve precisely such intractable problems. Furthermore, the pivotal breakthrough would not emerge from the bureaucratic labyrinth of committees or the controlled environments of wind tunnels, but rather from the unwavering resolve of one man's refusal to accept that brave individuals should continue to perish due to a fundamental flaw in design. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please write a comment below about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The genesis of this profound problem traced back to 1945, the precise moment Lieutenant Commander William P. Runn executed the inaugural jet landing aboard the USS Wake Island. His FR-1 Fireball touched down at a blistering 90 knots, a speed 20 knots faster than any preceding piston fighter, causing the arresting gear cables to shriek under the immense kinetic energy they were forced to absorb. Although the landing itself was successful, the ominous warning it implicitly conveyed was tragically disregarded. By 1950, every major navy across the globe found itself grappling with this identical, escalating crisis. While jet engines had undeniably revolutionized aerial speed and altitude capabilities, their inherently sluggish throttle response inadvertently created a deadly trap for pilots. In stark contrast, pilots of propeller aircraft could simply cut their throttle upon receiving the landing signal officer's cut signal, effectively allowing their aircraft to fall onto the deck with controlled deceleration. Jets, however, were incapable of such a maneuver. They were compelled to land power on, maintaining a continuous thrust until their wheels made contact with the deck, primarily because their engines required an unacceptably long duration to accelerate should a go-around become necessary. This fundamental difference in operational characteristics engineered a truly hellish scenario for naval aviators. Pilots would execute their final approach with their engines fully spooled up, irrevocably committed to the landing, yet simultaneously unable to rapidly gain altitude if they happened to miss the crucial arresting wires. On a conventional straight-deck carrier, a configuration of 4 arresting wires spanned a mere 60 feet of deck space. Immediately behind these wires lay the formidable crash barricade, a complex web of steel cables specifically engineered to ensnare aircraft that overshot their mark. And beyond that, in a terrifying progression, were rows of parked aircraft, highly flammable fuel trucks, and ammunition carts. A volatile assembly of everything required to transform the flight deck into an active, dangerous combat zone. The mathematical realities of this situation were brutally unforgiving. A Panther jet, landing at a speed of 125 knots, covered an astonishing 211 feet per second. Consequently, if a pilot failed to engage any of the 4 wires, he had precisely 2.1 seconds before an inevitable devastating impact with the barricade. While the barricade occasionally functioned as intended, its failures were catastrophic. When it yielded, a 30-ton mass of jet fuel and ordnance would plow into the aircraft parked forward at a speed of 100 miles per hour, unleashing unimaginable destruction. Captain Bruce Williams, serving as the air operations officer on the USS Kearsarge, bore witness to the horrific deaths of 11 men when a barrier failed in March 1951. The subsequent accident report chillingly documented the incident. Aircraft struck barrier at full power. Barrier separated. Aircraft continued forward into 6 parked Corsairs. Resulting fire reached aviation gasoline stores. 14 aircraft destroyed. 11 personnel killed. 23 injured. Carrier operations suspended 48 hours. In response, the universally adopted solution involved the development of ostensibly better barriers. The British, for instance, pioneered the flex deck, an innovative rubberized landing surface, theoretically designed to catch jets even without their landing gear deployed. Test pilot Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown conducted 40 landings on this system at Farnborough, describing it as fundamentally sound in his official reports, though privately confessing to his friends that it was bloody terrifying. The Americans, in their turn, invested heavily in constructing more robust barricades. The Bureau of Aeronautics allocated a substantial $3.2 million towards the development of the Davis barrier system, an intricate mechanical web touted to halt a 25,000-pound aircraft at full throttle. When this system performed as designed, it was indeed impressive. However, when it failed, the ensuing devastation was absolute. Crucially, stronger barriers, while perhaps mitigating the immediate aftermath, did not prevent the crashes themselves. They merely contained them, often with tragic consequences. Every seasoned aviator understood the true underlying problem, the inherent limitations of the flight deck itself. Captain William T. Rasure, who headed aviation military characteristics at the Office of the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations, articulated this critical flaw in June 1945, writing, "Current landing procedures force all aircraft into a 60-foot impact zone with zero margin for error. This is incompatible with jet aircraft performance characteristics." His statement, when translated from officialese, conveyed a stark message. We engineered our carriers for propeller aircraft, capable of landing at 70 knots and executing a last-second abort. Jets, however, land at 130 knots and cannot abort. We are attempting to land 1952 aircraft on 1942 ships. People will continue to die until this fundamental issue is rectified. There was universal consensus on this point. Everyone recognized the problem, yet no one seemed capable of devising a viable solution. The British experimented with flex decks. The Americans pursued stronger barriers, backup barriers, and emergency net systems. The French explored reducing aircraft weight. None of these attempts yielded a satisfactory outcome. Consequently, the accident rate continued its relentless ascent. What was desperately needed was an individual audacious enough to challenge the one unexamined assumption: why did the landing area absolutely have to be parallel to the ship's longitudinal axis? What they truly needed was Dennis Campbell. Captain Dennis Royal Farrington Campbell was, by all conventional measures, not destined to solve such a monumental problem. He was primarily a bureaucrat. Born on November 13, 1907, in Southsea, England, Campbell commenced his naval career in 1925 as a midshipman. He successfully qualified as a pilot in September 1931. Early enough in aviation history to have flown fabric-covered biplanes, yet late enough to grasp that naval aviation had transcended a mere gentleman's hobby, evolving into a demanding profession that necessitated rigorous engineering precision. During the tumultuous years of World War II, he piloted Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers, those seemingly obsolete aircraft that, against all odds, played a pivotal role in crippling the formidable German battleship Bismarck. His distinguished service earned him the prestigious Distinguished Service Cross. No one ever characterized him as a genius, nor was he lauded as a visionary. Following the cessation of hostilities, the Admiralty assigned him to the Ministry of Supply as the Deputy Chief RN Representative, a quintessential desk job involving the management of technical liaison between the Navy and various civilian contractors. He possessed no formal engineering credentials, no advanced academic degrees. His daily responsibilities revolved around paperwork, meticulously tracking development schedules, attending countless coordination meetings, and signing requisitions. However, Dennis Campbell possessed an invaluable quality that no set of credentials could ever impart. He simply could not ignore the tragic deaths of fellow pilots. In 1951, he attended the somber funeral of Lieutenant Michael Mick Lithgow, a promising test pilot who had perished when his jet collided with the barricade aboard HMS Implacable. Lithgow, a mere 23 years old, had once been Campbell's student. His approach had been flawless, his speed perfect, yet he had inexplicably floated just 6 feet too far, thereby missing the critical arresting wires. The barricade had failed, and Lithgow's aircraft had disintegrated upon impact. His widow, tragically, was 5 months pregnant. Standing at that graveside, a deeply affected Campbell later confided in his deputy, Lieutenant Commander Nick Goodhart, "This is utterly insane. We are murdering them with our own equipment. A pilot executes every maneuver correctly and still dies because a 60-foot margin for error is simply insufficient. There must be an alternative." Goodhart, familiar with such expressions of grief and frustration at funerals, expected nothing further. Yet Campbell remained consumed by the problem, relentlessly obsessing over it. He meticulously reviewed accident reports, interviewed numerous landing signal officers, LSOs, and diligently studied countless landing patterns. Lacking an engineering background, he resorted to the intuitive method of non-engineers. He drew pictures. The profound revelation struck him during a train journey from Portsmouth to London. Campbell filled his notebook with sketches of carrier decks, earnestly attempting to visualize how to provide pilots with more generous maneuvering space. His mind raced. If you cannot make the landing area longer, then make it wider. If you cannot make it wider because the ship's beam is fixed, then angle it. Angle it. With this thought, he drew a flight deck canted at a precise 10 degrees to port. Suddenly, the landing zone no longer terminated at the unforgiving barricade. Instead, it extended into the vast expanse of open water. A pilot who missed the arresting wires could now simply advance his throttle, climb away, and execute another attempt. There would be no barricade, no rows of parked aircraft, and no catastrophic collision. Only the boundless air and ocean offering a precious second chance. The sheer simplicity of this idea made it feel almost absurd, suggesting either that he had stumbled upon something truly brilliant, or that he had overlooked some fundamental, obvious detail that every seasoned engineer already knew. The existing knowledge within the naval aviation community was about to be profoundly challenged. On the 7th day of August in 1951, Captain Dennis Campbell convened a pivotal gathering at the Ministry of Supply. Among the distinguished attendees were Louis Boddington, the astute director of the Naval Air Department at Farnborough, Rear Admiral M.S. Slattery, who served as the chief of naval research, and a contingent of 6 highly experienced senior aviation engineers. Campbell, with a palpable sense of anticipation, opened his briefcase and revealed a simple yet revolutionary sketch. The room immediately erupted in a cacophony of astonishment and outrage. "That is completely illegal," declared Commander James, the senior flight operations specialist, his voice remaining level despite the explosive atmosphere. His words, however, carried the undeniable weight of an immutable law, as if echoing a fundamental principle of physics itself. He sternly reminded them, the International Air Navigation Convention unequivocally stipulates that all flight operations must align with the vessel's longitudinal axis. What you are audacious enough to propose directly contravenes a critical maritime aviation law, one that was meticulously crafted and refined over 15 years of rigorous carrier operations. This, Captain, is not an act of innovation. It is nothing short of amateur folly. Campbell, while anticipating a degree of opposition, had not braced himself for such an overt display of condescension. James pressed his point further, elucidating the perceived dangers. "You are effectively asking seasoned pilots to execute landings perpendicular to the ship's natural movement. Carriers inherently exhibit complex pitching and rolling motions around their keel. An angled deck, by its very design, would compel pilots to approach at an oblique angle to these dynamic movements. They would be perpetually battling against unpredictable drift. The designated landing area would be shifting beneath them in ways they simply cannot anticipate. Far from mitigating risks, you will undoubtedly precipitate an increase in catastrophic crashes, not a reduction." Lieutenant Commander Goodhart began to formulate a rebuttal, but Louis Boddington, the civilian engineer from Farnborough, calmly raised a hand, commanding silence. "Show me the math," Boddington stated, his voice cutting through the tension. "I beg your pardon," a bewildered James responded. "The math," Boddington reiterated, his gaze unwavering. "You assert that pilots will contend with drift. Quantify it. An 8-degree angle on a flight deck that is rolling through 12 degrees. What is the precise differential drift over a critical 30-second approach window?" A profound silence descended upon the room. Boddington surveyed the faces of the other engineers. "Anyone?" he prompted gently. No one uttered a sound. "Then we shall put it to the test," Boddington declared, breaking the silence with a decisive resolve. "Captain Campbell, the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough possesses a facility with a painted outline runway. We can readily replicate an angled deck outline on the flight deck of HMS Triumph. Within a single week, we will commence simulated touch-and-go approaches. If this drift problem is a genuine concern, we will empirically measure its effects. Conversely, if it proves to be merely theoretical catastrophizing, we will ascertain that truth as well." Rear Admiral Slattery, observing the unfolding determination, leaned back in his chair. "Louis, you must fully comprehend that if you proceed to paint an angled deck on Triumph and pilots subsequently begin to crash, you will be irrevocably terminating not only your own distinguished career, but also a Captain Campbell's." "Duly noted, sir," Boddington responded, a slight smile gracing his lips. "And if, by some fortunate works, then we will finally cease the tragic loss of pilots, who, despite their flawless execution, are currently paying the ultimate price." Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The experimental trials commenced in September of 1951. HMS Triumph departed from Portsmouth, her axial flight deck now conspicuously marked with a stark white outline delineating an angled deck, a conceptual, not structural modification, achieved solely through paint. For a period of 3 weeks, skilled Navy pilots conducted numerous touch-and-go approaches, meticulously pretending that the painted line signified a real, structural deck edge. The much-feared drift problem, so vehemently predicted, simply failed to materialize. Astonishingly, pilots acclimated to the novel approach geometry within just 2 landings. What they unearthed instead was an unprecedented sense of operational freedom. Lieutenant Peter Chilton, one of the pioneering test pilots, later penned a vivid account of his experience. I came in a little too high, floated effortlessly past the arresting wires, and for the very first time in my entire career, I was not gripped by terror. I simply poured on the power and climbed gracefully away. There was no menacing barrier awaiting to claim my aircraft, and potentially my life. There was no other aircraft directly ahead, just pristine, clear air, and the invaluable gift of a second chance. I felt as though my life had been mercifully returned to me. By the close of October, these painted deck trials had conclusively validated the concept's efficacy. The arduous phase of convincing the broader naval establishment, however, was just beginning. Given that HMS Triumph was a British vessel, the carrier community most acutely afflicted by the existing design flaws, specifically the American carrier fleet, whose pilots were tragically succumbing at twice the rate of their Royal Navy counterparts, presented the most formidable challenge. The United States Navy, with its proud traditions, was notoriously unreceptive to British officers dictating how they ought to land their aircraft. On the 14th of September 1951, at the U.S. Naval Air Test Center in Patuxent River, Maryland, Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown stood before a gathering of 40 American test pilots. He could feel every scrutinizing gaze in the room, each pilot silently assessing whether he was worthy of their trust. Brown, as the Royal Navy's chief test pilot, commanded an unparalleled reputation, having landed more distinct aircraft types than any other individual in the annals of aviation history. He held every significant British naval aviation record. Yet at this precise moment, none of these formidable credentials seemed to matter, for he was poised to deliver the deeply unsettling news to the United States Navy that their revered aircraft carriers were fundamentally flawed in their design. "Gentlemen," Brown began, his voice resonating with quiet authority, "in the past 12 months, how many of you have struck the barricade?" 7 hands tentatively rose, then 12, then 15. A grim tally. "How many of you personally know someone who tragically perished hitting the barricade?" This time, every single hand in the room slowly ascended. Brown then unlatched his briefcase. "I am about to present to you something that the Royal Navy is currently evaluating. It will undoubtedly sound utterly insane, yet I have personally executed 63 landings utilizing this method. And as you can clearly see, I am standing here before you today rather than having been scraped off a deck. Therefore, I implore you to extend me the courtesy of hearing me out." He then affixed Captain Campbell's diagram to the wall, a depiction of an aircraft carrier flight deck angled 8 degrees to port. The room instantly erupted in a torrent of objections. You expect us to land sideways? The landing signal officer will be unable to accurately perceive the approach angle. What about the island? You've shifted the primary landing zone dangerously close to the superstructure. Brown patiently waited for the impassioned clamor to subside. Every single objection you have just voiced, we ourselves initially harbored every one of them. Then, we subjected it to rigorous testing. And here is what we unequivocally discovered. When you fail to catch the arresting wires on an angled deck, you do not perish. You simply advance the throttle to full power and execute a go-around. It is as straightforward as that. Commander Harold Buell, the commanding officer of VF-84, rose to his feet, a figure of seasoned authority. "Commander Brown," he stated, his voice carrying the weight of experience, "I have been conducting landings on carriers since 1943. What you are currently describing violates every single principle we have painstakingly developed and refined throughout 8 demanding years of combat operations. You are asking us to discard proven doctrine in favor of a mere British theory." Brown's retort was immediate and incisive. "I am asking you to cease dying for what is, in essence, a design flaw." A profound silence once again enveloped the room. Brown continued, elaborating on his point. "You are compelled to land modern jet aircraft on straight decks simply because that is the infrastructure you possess. However, these straight decks were originally conceived and engineered for propeller-driven aircraft like Corsairs and Hellcats, which possessed the capability to instantly cut throttle and virtually fall onto the deck. Contemporary jet aircraft lack this inherent ability. Consequently, you are forcing 1952-era aircraft into operational procedures designed for 1942, and your dedicated personnel are tragically perishing as a direct result." The angled deck does not violate established doctrine. Rather, it intelligently adapts the carrier to harmoniously match the operational requirements of the aircraft. Rear Admiral Apollo Soucek, the senior U.S. Navy aviator stationed in London, stepped forward, lending his considerable prestige to Brown's argument. "I have personally observed the Triumph tests. Commander Brown's assertions are entirely correct. The concept demonstrably works. I have formally recommended to the Chief of Naval Operations that we conduct parallel tests on the USS Midway." However, Rear Admiral Alfred Pride, the formidable chief of the Bureau of Aeronautics, shook his head in disagreement. "We are already actively testing alternative solutions. The Davis Barrier, for instance, boasts a documented 98.7% success rate." 98.7% of what? Brown interjected sharply, challenging the statistic. "Of the aircraft that actually strike it? What about the countless pilots who never even reach the barrier because they perceive its imminent impact and panic? What about those who deliberately choose to ditch their aircraft in the ocean rather than risk the catastrophic impact with the barricade at full power? Your statistic measures the performance of a barrier. It fundamentally fails to measure pilot survival." The room once again erupted in a cacophony of voices. Approximately half of the pilots present were nodding in agreement, while the other half appeared poised to physically eject Brown from the base. Admiral Soucek, raising his voice to be heard above the din, commanded, Gentlemen, silence! We will proceed to test the angled deck on USS Midway. This will involve paint trials and simulated landings. If it proves successful, we will undertake the full structural modification of one carrier for complete implementation." If it fails, we will permanently abandon the idea. But we will not, under any circumstances, continue to lose pilots to a design flaw that we possess the means to test and potentially rectify. Are we absolutely clear? Admiral Pride stood silently for 10 long seconds, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke. Midway trials authorized. However, if this British pipe dream results in a single additional casualty, I will personally terminate the program and everyone associated with it. Soucek simply nodded. Agreed. The contentious meeting concluded. Brown meticulously packed his briefcase, acutely aware that he had just staked his entire career on the efficacy of a painted line. What he could not have known then was that within 90 short days, the painted line on Midway would prove so resoundingly successful that the U.S. Navy would initiate the conversion of USS Antietam into the world's very first true angled deck carrier. On January 12, 1953, off the sun-drenched coast of Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, Lieutenant Commander Harold Buell expertly guided his F-9 F-5 Panther into the established landing pattern behind the USS Antietam. This marked his 43rd carrier landing, yet it was his inaugural experience with an angled deck that was not merely painted, but genuinely structural. An 8-degree sponson extending proudly from the port side, meticulously welded directly to the carrier's formidable hull. Buell harbored a profound distrust of this radical innovation. His entire career had been meticulously dedicated to the principle of either catching the arresting wires or bravely confronting the barricade. That ingrained fear had, on 2 separate occasions, unequivocally saved his life. Now, they were instructing him to completely disregard that life-saving instinct. He lowered his landing gear, made precise adjustments to his trim, and confidently called the ball. "Panther Ball 3.2, he announced. "Roger Ball," the landing signal officer calmly responded. Buell's approach was flawless until a sudden, unexpected gust of wind subtly lifted his aircraft by approximately 6 feet. He was undeniably high. On a conventional straight deck, this scenario would invariably prompt the LSO to issue a definitive wave-off, compelling Buell to climb away, consume precious fuel, and attempt another potentially more stressful approach. But today, the LSO remained silent. Because on an angled deck, being slightly high was no longer a catastrophic error. It was, instead, a valuable opportunity for correction. Buell instinctively dipped his nose slightly, bleeding off the excess altitude, but in doing so he found himself too long. He was going to miss the wires. On a straight deck, this precise moment was when unadulterated panic would seize a pilot, leading to desperate, often fatal corrections that inevitably resulted in crashes. But Buell, with immense self-discipline, forced himself to adhere to the explicit instructions from the briefing. "If you miss, you climb. The deck is unequivocally clear. Trust it." His wheels slammed down onto the deck. He bounced once. His tailhook skipped over the first wire, then the second, then the third, and finally the fourth. He had missed them all. On a straight deck, the barricade would, by now, be mercilessly tearing his aircraft apart. But here, there was no barricade. Only an expanse of open deck and the inviting promise of clear air. Buell instinctively shoved his throttle to its full power setting. His J-48 engine spooled up, reaching maximum thrust in what felt like an eternity, but was actually 6 critical seconds, a precious gift of time. The Panther gracefully lifted off the deck. He was flying again. 23 seconds later, he was seamlessly re-established in the landing pattern. On his second approach, this time he expertly snagged the 3-wire. It was a perfect landing. Buell climbed out of his cockpit, his entire body trembling, not from residual fear, but from a profound sense of relief, a liberation from a psychological burden he hadn't even realized he had been carrying for years. He would later articulate this transformative experience in his autobiography. To an experienced tailhooker, landing a jet airplane on an angled deck was sheer bliss. For the first time in my entire career, I was not consumed by the dread of dying during every single approach. The immense psychological weight that lifted off me that day, I genuinely did not realize I had been carrying it until it was finally gloriously gone. The dramatic implications were immediate and undeniable. Over a concentrated period of 60 days, Carrier Air Group 8 executed an astounding 1,227 landings upon the USS Antietam's newly installed angled deck. During this intensive operational trial, they recorded merely 8 bolters, instances where aircraft missed the arresting wires, necessitating a swift go-around and a subsequent approach. Had these same 8 bolters occurred on a traditional straight deck, the consequences could have been catastrophic, potentially leading to 5 barrier crashes, the destruction of 2 valuable aircraft, and the tragic loss of 1 or 2 pilots' lives. Yet, with the innovative angled deck, the tally remained at 0 crashes, 0 destroyed aircraft, and 0 injuries, presenting an irrefutable testament to its revolutionary safety benefits. The statistical evidence further underscored this profound transformation between 1950 and 1952. Prior to the widespread adoption of the angled deck, U.S. Navy carrier aviation suffered an average of 647 Class A mishaps annually, with landing accidents accounting for a staggering 52% of all losses. Following the implementation of the angled deck from 1955 to 1957, Class A mishaps plummeted to 321 per TDOE's year, and landing incidents comprised only 19% of total losses. This represented a remarkable 75% reduction in landing accidents and an 80% decrease in fatalities directly attributable to barrier-related incidents. However, mere numbers, compelling as they are, fail to capture the profound human impact of this innovation. Lieutenant James Davidson's personal account vividly illustrates this. On a fateful day, March 8, 1953, Davidson found himself wrestling his crippled Panther jet back to the Antietam, grappling with a complete hydraulic failure and inoperative flaps. His approach speed was a perilous 20 knots above the safe threshold. On a conventional straight deck, facing such dire circumstances, he would have undoubtedly chosen to ditch his aircraft in the unforgiving ocean rather than risk a devastating barrier crash at 145 knots. But the Antietam, equipped with its pioneering angled deck, offered a lifeline. Davidson attempted 4 nerve-wracking approaches, missing the arresting wires on each desperate pass. On his 4th and final attempt, with the weight of desperation pressing upon him, Lieutenant Davidson skillfully snagged the 4-wire at a blistering speed of 142 knots, marking what was, at that time, the fastest successful carrier landing ever recorded. His aircraft screeched to a halt with a mere 11 feet of deck space remaining, a testament to both his exceptional piloting skill and the angled deck's expanded margin for error. 6 months later, a deeply moved Davidson penned a letter to Captain Campbell, expressing his profound gratitude. "Sir, I never met you, but I'm alive to write this letter because you had an idea everyone said was impossible. My daughter was born last month. I got to be there because you refused to accept that good pilots should die for bad design. Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you. This heartfelt message encapsulated the very essence of Campbell, SK's contribution, directly linking his innovative concept to the preservation of life and the ability for a pilot to witness pivotal family moments, all born from a steadfast refusal to tolerate preventable tragedy stemming from inherent design flaws. The revolutionary angled deck swiftly gained international recognition and adoption. In 1955, the British Royal Navy proudly integrated the design into HMS Ark Royal. The French Navy followed suit, undertaking the conversion of their carrier Clemenceau, while the Australians modified their vessel, Melbourne. By 1957, the angled deck had become an indispensable feature. Every major aircraft carrier within the Western world either boasted this design from its inception or was undergoing extensive retrofitting to incorporate it, signifying a rapid and universal acceptance of its superior safety and operational advantages. Initially, the Soviet Union, steeped in its own doctrines, rejected the innovative concept. However, this stance proved unsustainable. Following a series of catastrophic landing accidents aboard their straight-deck carrier Varyag in 1959, the Soviets quietly and pragmatically implemented the angled deck. Declassified Soviet naval records from 1993 subsequently revealed a dramatic 68% reduction in landing accidents within just 6 months of its adoption, providing compelling independent validation of its efficacy across different operational philosophies and naval powers. We urge you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please also consider writing a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Beyond the stark statistics and official records, the most profound and compelling endorsements of the angled deck emanate directly from the aviators themselves. Captain John Moore, a veteran pilot who bravely flew combat missions over Vietnam from the deck of the USS Coral Sea, offered a powerful reflection. He recounted making an impressive 947 carrier landings between 1954 and 1973, experiencing 62 bolters, instances where he missed all the arresting wires. Each of these 62 bolters, he emphasized, represented a potential barrier crash, 62 distinct opportunities for him to perish or to inadvertently endanger the lives of the dedicated sailors working on the forward deck. Instead, thanks to the angled deck, he was simply able to climb way and try again, a luxury unimaginable on a straight deck. Moore articulated a shared sentiment among pilots of his generation, a poignant moment of reflection where they recall friends tragically lost in the 1950s to devastating barricade collisions. "We're alive," he stated unequivocally, because Dennis Campbell drew a line on a piece of paper and refused to shut up about it. By 1975, the angled deck had become so thoroughly integrated and ubiquitous within naval aviation that younger generations of pilots were largely unaware that aircraft carriers had ever been designed differently. It had ceased to be viewed as a mere innovation. Instead, it had transformed into the fundamental, unquestioned operational standard, the inherent way carriers functioned. This profound transformation marked the completion of a quiet revolution, a breakthrough so successful that it became effectively invisible. While the angled deck undeniably saved thousands of lives, Dennis Campbell, its visionary architect, never actively pursued personal fame or recognition for his monumental achievement. In fact, his actions and character, following this groundbreaking success, reveal even more surprising facets of his unassuming nature. Captain Dennis Campbell, despite his pivotal role, steadfastly avoided giving any press interviews regarding the angled deck. Following his promotion to Rear Admiral in 1954, he attended the ceremonial launch of HMS Ark Royal, the world's first aircraft carrier, designed from the keel up with the angled deck. When reporters naturally sought his comments, he humbly redirected them to Louis Boddington and the skilled engineers at Farnborough, crediting the technical team rather than himself. In 1955, when the U.S. Navy extended an invitation to the commissioning of the USS Forrestal, the inaugural American supercarrier, equipped with an angled deck, steam catapults, and an optical landing aid, Campbell respectfully declined. His absence was not due to indifference, but rather a deeply personal commitment. He was attending the funeral of a Royal Navy lieutenant killed in a training accident. Notably, this was not a carrier-related incident, but a helicopter crash entirely unrelated to Campbell's specific work. However, the lieutenant had served under him in 1943, and Campbell held an unwavering belief that one must always attend the funerals of your people, demonstrating a profound sense of loyalty and responsibility. In 1957, the Admiralty formally recognized his exceptional contributions, bestowing upon him the Commander of the Order of the British Empire, or CBE, for his distinguished services to naval aviation. The official citation for this prestigious award was remarkably concise, spanning only 2 sentences. True to his humble nature, Campbell simply kept it tucked away in a drawer. After retiring from the Royal Navy in 1960, he transitioned into a new role as a technical consultant for Hawker Siddeley Aviation, dedicating his expertise to the pioneering development of vertical takeoff jets. In this capacity, his colleagues vividly recalled his almost obsessive focus on pilot safety, a trait that often led him to irritate designers by insisting on the inclusion of seemingly unnecessary redundancies within cockpit systems. Engineer Anthony Marsh recounted, "Dennis would slow down every design review, asking questions like, 'What happens if this fails at night in bad weather?' We'd tell him the odds of that failure were 1 in 10,000. He'd say, 'What does the pilot do when it happens?' He never cared about odds. He cared about the one pilot who got unlucky." This anecdote perfectly encapsulated Campbell's unwavering commitment to the individual aviator's survival, prioritizing human life over statistical probabilities. Dennis Campbell passed away on April 6, 2000, at the venerable age of 92. His obituary in the Times spanned 4 paragraphs, while The Guardian dedicated 6 to his memory. Both publications duly mentioned his pivotal role in developing the angled deck. However, neither, in the estimation of those who understood its true impact, fully captured its profound significance. What it truly signified was this: every single carrier landing successfully executed since 1953 has occurred because one tenacious individual refused to accept that his colleagues should face preventable deaths due to a flawed system. Today, the angled deck stands as a universal standard, integrated into the design of every aircraft carrier across the globe, whether American, British, French, Indian, Chinese, or Russian. Even the U.S. Navy's cutting-edge Gerald R. Ford-class carriers, boasting advanced electromagnetic catapults and sophisticated arresting gear, feature a deck angled precisely 8 degrees to port, exactly as Campbell envisioned and sketched it in 1951. Modern carrier pilots across the U.S. Navy's fleet alone perform over 15,000 landings annually, The bolter rate, representing missed wire approaches requiring a go-around, remains approximately 8%. This translates to roughly 1/200 such incidents each year. Without the safety net provided by the angled deck, each of these 1,200 instances would represent a potential barrier crash with potentially fatal consequences. The sheer number of lives saved is staggering, hundreds every year, accumulating to tens of thousands over the past 7 decades. A silent, ongoing testament to Campbell's foresight. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Black, U.S. Marine Corps retired, who skillfully piloted FA-18s off carriers from 1985 to 2007, personally sought out Campbell's family in 2003 and sent them a deeply moving letter. In his correspondence, Black conveyed, "I never met your father, but I made 147 carrier landings during my career. I boltered 142 times, missed all the wires, and had to go around on a straight deck. That's 142 times I might have died. Instead, I just climbed away and tried again. Your father gave me 142 second chances. He gave me a career. He gave me a life." On behalf of every carrier pilot who lived because of him, thank you. Dennis Campbell, having passed away 3 years prior, was unable to respond to this heartfelt letter. However, his son, understanding its profound significance, had it framed. While his father was known for never keeping his own awards or accolades, his son believed with absolute certainty that Campbell would have cherished and preserved this particular message above all else. The overarching lesson to be gleaned from this remarkable narrative is that truly transformative breakthroughs do not always originate from the designated experts or within established research institutions. Instead, they often emerge from the relentless conviction of an individual who steadfastly refuses to accept "that's how we've always done it" as an adequate answer. Captain Campbell was neither an engineer nor a test pilot. He was, by occupation, a bureaucrat. Yet he possessed an unyielding inability to disregard the preventable deaths of his friends and colleagues. He harbored the audacious courage to simply draw a line on a piece of paper and pose the fundamental question, why not? The angled deck, his brainchild, has demonstrably saved more lives than any recipient of the Medal of Honor. It revolutionized naval warfare more profoundly than even nuclear power or guided missiles. Crucially, this innovation did not spring forth from bureaucratic committees or sophisticated laboratories. It was born from a moment of insight during a train ride, captured in a notebook sketch, and driven forward by an unwavering refusal to be silenced when confronted with universal skepticism and the assertion that it was impossible. That truly is the authentic story, and that is why it holds such enduring importance, because the next Dennis Campbell may not be an admiral or an engineer. They may not possess impressive credentials or advanced degrees. They might simply be an ordinary person who observes a problem that everyone else has come to accept, and yet they refuse to accept it themselves. History, in its grand tapestry, does not always belong to the loudest voices or those occupying the highest ranks. Sometimes it belongs, quite simply, to the one person who will not permit good people to perish due to a bad design.